Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. It is time to wrap up Rankings Day with the wide receiver position. My name is Steve, and these are preliminary rankings. So, just a heads up, you can find my final rankings live with me on Sunday morning, 1 hour before kickoff. It'll be right over here on the screen in all of its glory, and you don't even need to talk with me if you just want to see the rankings, or you can ask me some start-sit questions, so that way you have me to blame if I get it wrong. Other than that, you can also find the rankings up on the website as of Thursday. Those are updated from time to time. Try to get them Saturday night or Sunday morning before I take them off and get ready to go live. Check that out. Website www.theffforge.com. There is a link down in the description. Also, let's just explain what we're looking at here a little bit. These colors are tiers, and so if there's a less dark shaded color, it's kind of a 1A, 1B here, and of course that could be any coloring for any tier. Then, of course, the player name, the opponent, and here is the matchup difficulty for this opponent. Is it a good matchup? Well, then it would be the darker the red, the more juicy, the more hot the matchup is. The deeper the blue, the colder the matchup is. The worse it is, and white would be a neutral-ish matchup. So just think like a faucet, red hot, blue cold. And then here is the ECR. This is the Experts Consensus Ranking. This is a big portion of the reason that these are preliminary rankings, and that I stress that, because I begin with the ECR, the Expert Consensus Ranking from Fantasy Pros website, and then I move them around from there. However, my projections are going to have a big influence on the final outcome of my the rankings that will go up onto the website on Thursday. As soon as I'm done doing this video, I'm going to spend all day entering in rankings, plugging in numbers. Then here is the difference between my ranking and the ECR, and this will help me to determine who I'm going to speak about, who the biggest differences that I have with the ECR as of how they are ranking them right now and how I have them ranked. And you can always look over here. So let's get going. I hope I covered everything. Also, other videos are out this morning. The quarterbacks and tight ends videos were released, and this afternoon the running backs videos were released just about probably 2 hours before this one. So go and check out any of those videos for any of the positions that you have any questions with. Now, my first tier for the running backs starts off at the RB1, of course, with Davante Adams. Why am I calling them running backs? Wide receivers, anytime I said running back, just wipe that out, change wide receiver with it. So the wide receiver one is Davante Adams, followed by Tyreek Hill, followed by Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Keenan Allen to wrap that up at the wide receiver 11. As you can see, nobody really to speak about, no huge differences from the ECR to me. But I do have a tier cutoff here at Justin Jefferson to Amon-Ra St. Brown. Really juicy matchup for Amon-Ra. I wanted to push him up further, which is a rarity for the wide receiver position. This week, I found myself really wanting to push a lot of guys down, further down, and not wanting to push a lot of guys up. That is the state of the wide receivers right now. Whereas the running backs, it was a little tougher. It was more like I had a rush to get guys into that top 26 or so. There's a crunch for the running backs versus the wide receivers. The crunch is much further back or almost non-existent, because there's a lot of questions that start to pop up. Let's start with the second tier here at wide receiver 12 with Amari Cooper, followed by DK Metcalf, Christian Kirk, Chris Godwin, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Tyler Lockett, Christian Watson, and Mike Evans to wrap that up at the wide receiver 23. I will not be surprised if I have Christian Kirk ahead of DK Metcalf in the rankings in the final my final rankings, and then Brandon Ayuk is the first one here that we're going to talk about, because I have him 6 spots ahead of the ECR. If I'm at 16th, the ECR and him is 22. In general, I just am going to like the San Francisco passing players. George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. Going to like them this week going up against Miami, so there's a lot of upside there. And as far as the season long goes, Brandon Ayuk has been the more reliable, better fantasy player than Deebo Samuel, so going to give him the heads up there. And yeah, so that is the reason for that difference there. Then we can move all the way down here to Christian Watson, who I have 6 spots ahead of the ECR. I have him at 22nd. ECR on him is 28. Going up against Chicago, it's a really good matchup. It feels like the bottom's got to fall out on Christian Watson here sometime soon. But when you give me a juicy matchup like the one against Chicago, I have to hope and expect that what's been happening lately will be able to continue to happen. And that's, the performance is why I have Christian Watson up ahead of Mike Evans. I have Mike Evans at 23. The ECR on him is 17. So I have him 6 spots behind the ECR. Going up against New Orleans, not a great matchup. It's a slightly cold matchup there for the passing attack, and I think it's been quite clear as of late that Chris Godwin is the better fantasy option. So he has jumped Mike, and Mike has fallen a little bit with no great performances for some time now. There should be 1 or 2 more this season yet, but we will see. I just would feel safer or be more hopeful in some instances with some other players. Now let's move on to the third tier of wide receivers here, starting at wide receiver 24 with Devonta Smith, followed by Juju Smith-Schuster, Courtland Sutton, Michael Pittman Jr., George Pickens, Gabe Davis, Allen Lazard, Jacoby Myers, Joshua Palmer, Deontay Johnson, Tyler Boyd, and Zay Jones to wrap up this tier. The whole point of tiers is you can make arguments for even Zay Jones over Devonta Smith. I think it'd be a little bit easier to make the argument for Tyler Boyd over Devonta Smith. Of course, recent performance would put Zay Jones above Tyler Boyd. We're trying to project forward, not what happened last week. So, this week, I have Allen Lazard 3 spots ahead of the ECR. Not really much to talk about. It's just one of those things similar to the receivers going up against Miami there for San Francisco. I'm going to like the Green Bay primary receiving options here going up against Chicago, and hope that Lazard can get out of the funk that he's been as of late. We know that the talent is there, and one of these weeks it'll show up again and hopefully be there for the rest of the season for Allen Lazard owners. Then Tyler Boyd, I have 4 spots ahead of the ECR. I have him at 34. The ECR on him is 38. Going up against Kansas City, once again, good matchup. There's a lot of these high-flying matchups this week. There should be a good amount of fantasy points scored overall this week. And Tyler Boyd has actually done better with Ja'Marr Chase in the lineup overall this season. So I would put him out there with a hope and a prayer if I needed to. Not a bad option, not a bad matchup. And that's, the story for a lot of these guys here. There's just some questions for him. Like, look at that, George Pickens. That's the best matchup there is there against Atlanta. Then Zay Jones, he's just been solid all season, and he's coming off a big week, so of course. Now let's move on to the next tier, which is how big here. Goes from wide receiver 36 all the way to wide receiver 48, starting with DeAndre Carter at 36, followed by Darius Slayton, Treylon Burks, Brandon Cooks, Nico Collins, Adam Thielen, Drake London, Curtis Samuel, Paris Campbell, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Mac Hollins, Marcus Valdes-Scantling, Michael Gallup. From Michael Gallup to essentially Curtis Samuel, I want to bump all of these guys up further. I kind of wanted to bump these two up a little bit more. There's a lot of question marks in this range. So let's start off with DeAndre Carter, who I have 36, 14 spots ahead of the ECR. The ECR on him is 50, going up against Las Vegas. Another great matchup, and he outperformed Joshua Palmer last week, so that's great. I'm not, obviously here I have him pretty close. If my projections were to give me a good enough reason to put DeAndre Carter ahead of Joshua Palmer, I'd be happy to take advantage of that. But just off the top of my head, it's a little hard to guarantee what we saw last week as far as him being the better option than Josh Palmer, but I do think that is very possible. So I don't mind DeAndre Carter as a flex in a great matchup, especially coming off the week that he came off of. But that's really the only reason. If he had done nothing last week, he would not be anywhere near that. Now let's move on to Adam Thielen, who I have ranked 41st, which is 4 spots behind the ECR. The ECR on him is 37. Going up against the New York Jets, don't like that matchup at all. Of course, he'll get the easier options there in the passing attack, but still, again, TJ Hawkinson is going to have another 12, 14 target game there. So I'm a little bit down on Adam Thielen. He had a good week last week, and that's why he's back into this range at least. Now let's move on to Donovan Peoples-Jones going up against Houston. I have him ranked 45th. The ECR on him is 41, so I have him 4 spots behind the ECR. Going up against Houston at not a terrible matchup, but it's not a good one either. They tend to limit the amount of fantasy points that are going to go up against him compared to some other matchups. And so, like DPJ, enough, but he's, it's going to be him or Amari this week. And of course, you're going to bet your money on Amari for the most part. That would be the expectation, that it'd be one or the other. And of course, there's also the question mark at quarterback. We don't know what those connections are going to look like exactly, but Deshaun Watson's definitely heavily targeted his best target in the past. Maybe stock up for Amari Cooper for the rest of this season. Now let's move on to my next tier of wide receivers from 49 to 57, starting at Jarvis Landry, ranked 49th for me, followed by Elijah Moore, Van Jefferson, Devin Duvernay, Isaiah McKenzie, Robert Woods, Julio Jones, Jahan Dotson, and Chase Claypool to wrap that up. Couple of quick things here. So Jarvis Landry, I have 3 spots ahead of the ECR. I'm at 49. ECR on him is 52 going up against Tampa Bay. They've been a decent matchup, and there is some sort of faulty floor that I'm hoping that when I step on it with Jarvis Landry, it does not fall underneath me. So I am very lightly trusting Jarvis Landry once we get into this area, in part due to that matchup. Same here with Elijah Moore. I have him ranked 50th. The ECR on him is 54, so I'm 4 spots ahead. Going up against Minnesota, it's a really good matchup. There was some connection there last week between Mike White and himself, hoping for a big play, essentially, because the target share is probably not going to be huge, but there should be a few chances. Hoping that works out in a better matchup than a lot of these ones. Which brings me to Van Jefferson, who I have 4 spots behind the ECR. I'm at 51. The ECR is 47 on him going up against Seattle. It's just not the best matchup for Van Jefferson, and I don't think he's a wide receiver 1, but he is the most talented wide receiver on that team currently. So I'm not expecting things to come easy for him, and you're really going to have to hope, like last week, that he just happens to get a touchdown or happens to get a big play, but I think there's a better chance that Elijah Moore does. Now let's move on to Isaiah McKenzie, who I have 5 spots behind the ECR. I'm at 53. The ECR on him is 48. Going up against New England, it's not a good matchup, and for the most part, and this came true last week, this season Isaiah McKenzie's been better in the matchups where they are expecting to be able to blow out their opponent, and so they have a confidence level of just keeping control of the ball, and I don't know that that's quite how this game looks. This might be a Gabe Davis type of game. So, last week was great for Isaiah McKenzie. Hasn't happened too many times this season, and I'm not really expecting it to happen again this week. Now, let's look at Chase Claypool, who I've ranked 57th. The ECR on him is 53, so I have him 4 spots behind that ECR going up against Green Bay, so it's a good matchup there. He has been getting utilized a little bit more, especially if they don't have Justin Fields, though. And then we get into the 3 last guys here, which you can see I have a little bit less faith in compared to the rest of this tier, and that's Alec Pierce and at wide receiver 58, followed by Corey Davis and Demarcus Robinson to wrap that up. Nothing else to talk about for the wide receivers. I think that is it, so go ahead, check out all the other videos for the other positions, which have all been released out today. Thank you very much. I will see you with my Saturday special, where I go over my steel stock scraps, which is like a start-sit / boom or bust, bold takes type of, predictions, whatever, suggestions there on Saturday, as well as going over the injury report, any big news articles that have come out over the last couple of days prior to it. So, thank you very much, and also, don't forget, rankings will be up on the website and live with me on Sunday, 1 hour before kickoff. Bye-bye.